Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Essential Role of Carbohydrates in Fitness Performance. My name is Erin Egan, and I'm the editor of Personal Fitness Professional. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all of you via email once the replay link is available, which should be within about 24 hours. Also, we'd like to encourage any questions you have during the presentation. You can submit those at any time using the Q&A button on the navigation bar. And at the end of the presentation, we will open it up to a Q&A. Our presenter today is Team USA triathlete and endurance coach, Michele Tuttle. Michele is a registered dietitian and certified specialist in sports dietetics with a private practice in the DC, Baltimore area. She counsels athletes of all levels on the best nutrition practices and patterns for optimal health, performance, and injury recovery. She coaches triathletes and other endurance athletes and has been an elite amateur triathlete competing as part of Team USA for over 10 years. Wow, it's a mouthful. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Michele.
All right, thanks, Erin. I appreciate the introduction. I also wanted to just thank the Wheat Foods Council for hosting today's webinar. Those of you, some of you may have never met me before. If so, great to have you listening to this today. Others of you may have seen me before. My connection with the Wheat Foods Council has been long and fun because I get to talk about things like today, talking about the important role of carbohydrates in fitness performance. So I tend to have a kind of a style where I talk all over the place. I'm going to stick to the script as much as I can. Like Erin, I'm going to encourage you, please, 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 if you have questions, chat them so that we can address them at the end of today's presentation. I've only got about 30 slides or so. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things, so let's get going, shall we? All right, first, a few objectives. I want to make sure that I've talking today about how diets and eating patterns can be contributing to a lot of the misinformation out there about nutrition. I also want to assess how low-carb diets can be basically damaging to performance. And I also want to talk a bit about how and why it's critical to find information that people can trust and use. And since many of you out there, I'm expecting, are fitness professionals, nutrition professionals, you are connected with this whole arena in some way, you may be the person that people are asking questions of. I mean, we all need to find great sources of information that we trust time and again. So I want to talk a little bit about that. All right, first of all, hopefully you can see this. And so not surprising, hello, everyone gets their information off the internet these days. It's right at our fingertips, our phones, etc. We can't avoid it. This is what happens. Much easier than picking up a book, a newspaper, listening to even a podcast, but this is the fact. And of course, there are pros and cons to having such instant information available all the time. One thing I think is interesting, though, is if you look at this is the cyclical nature of people searching for nutrition information. And what you'll notice is that there's this spike every so often. Well, that's January. And then you'll notice that as the year goes on, it tends to trend down because, again, what are we looking for in January? We're looking for that new approach to what we want to eat. Okay, so let me get to the next one. Here we go. Social media, we all know it's out there. We all use it. We all love it. These are the top platforms, in case you didn't know. I'm sure you do. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp, TikTok, and the list goes on. If people are not actively searching on the internet using Google, they are relying on their social media platforms. Again, pros and cons. Social media is lovely, but it's also very in the moment of what, it has a lot of influences on it. It tends to be, what this very famous person at the moment is doing and talking about, as opposed to something that is taken longer to ferment in the idea world out there. For example, it takes a long time to write a book. It takes a while to produce a scientific study and really get the answer right. But anyone, literally anyone, can produce a social media campaign in a matter of, I don't know, 24 hours or less, and put out a message out there that seems very credible. And I think it's something that we all need to be aware of, because nutrition information and health information is so prone to, you know, just kind of idea of the moment. In terms of trustworthiness, this is something I thought was interesting. And those of you, this is information that I've gotten from the International Food Information Council. They do a great survey. They survey 1,000 consumers every year, looking at a whole variety of issues around food, fitness, health, and I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with them, to go check them out. In any case, they do a great job of looking at who do we trust when it comes to social media. And in terms of trusting social media, about 67% of people out there trust it a lot, or at least a little. Okay. Only 14% say they don't trust it at all. So the bottom line is, when people see information out there, they believe it. Okay. But as we all know, social media is, you know, kind of a herd mentality sort of thing. You know, people love to follow the herd, and followers are often sometimes we tend to equate the truth with how many followers we have, etc., or what might be more credible with number of followers, and that's just not the case. Followers can be bought, and it's just something we have to be aware of. So when we look at credibility, to me, it's important to think about things like, okay, what are the credentials of this person? What's their reputation? Did they just spring up overnight? You know, what's the story? Is it too good to be true? Because if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Did they have any scientific references? Though, caveat there, I've certainly come across a lot of books with a whole host of references in the back, and when you really dig into them, some of them are pretty dubious. I tend to look, when I'm looking for credibility, is there agreement among a lot of different expert platforms and people? If over time there's been consistency and agreement, then I know there's good reason to be believed there. All right, now let's take a little bit deeper look at who we personally trust for nutrition information, because I think this is important. Again, this is coming from IFIC. And I was, you know, as a registered dietitian, of course, I was thrilled that, you know, registered dietitians happen to be very high on the list of those trusted to give nutrition information. But we also trust our personal health care providers, if we take a look at that here. We also trust a health coach. We also trust scientific studies. We trust the government, USDA, FDA, CDC, for example. We also trust fitness professionals. So bottom line is, there's a lot of trust people that we do trust out there. No one captures 100% of the trust, but it's good to see that for the most part, you know, people, I believe that most people do know where to get information, but still. All right, this is the truth as I see it. The bottom line is, when it comes to nutrition and health information, people are going to always want to believe in magic, not science. That's just the way it's always been, or the way it's always going to be. And diet and exercise, we know these things work. We know we need to do them. They are not magic, and they are not exciting. Melting fat in 30 days, this is incredibly exciting. This is always going to get everyone's attention. So as health and nutrition, fitness information people, we have to know that getting our message through out there can be challenging, but we have to keep doing it, okay? Other truth I know is that it is so easy to blame one food group for all the ills that we've got going on with nutrition out there than it is to do moderation. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look at that. So given all that, what I see is that people like to, and I call it, work around. Okay, meaning they try this diet, they try that diet, they go with this supplement, they try that other supplement, this person's doing this exercise, let me try that one, as opposed to just sticking with what works with them over time to keep them consistent and in the right lane. It's just too easy to say, well, I'm just not losing weight on that, let me try something else. Because that's another one of my beliefs, is that unfortunately we live in a world where we talk a good game of wanting to be healthy when it comes to nutrition, but in reality, most people want to lose weight. And when you see nutrition information out there in the world, largely what you're seeing is information geared toward weight loss. And this information does not work for athletes. All right, speaking of dieting, I hope you can see this with the way the screen is. Um, at any one time, over 52% of people are on a diet. And I don't care what you call it. You can call it mindful eating, you can call it intermittent fasting, you can call it clean eating, you can call it whatever you want. All these things on this list, as far as I'm concerned, are basically diets. And of course, high protein leads the way, along with low carb. That's just the other part of that. Mindful eating's up there, calorie counting, clean eating, intermittent fasting, flexitarian, blah, 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 all goes on. But the bottom line is all of these things are diets, and everyone is on board with this. Okay, so the dietary villain of the moment, and I say this with tongue in cheek because, in case you haven't noticed, I'm not exactly 20. I've been around long enough to see trends come and go. And at the moment, sugars are getting all the blame for all our nutrient ills and carbohydrates right behind it. And a little bit goes toward fat. But the bottom line is, I can remember when fat was all that was blamed and all these other things were not. One thing I want to point out about this slide, also, again, this is information from IFIC. Protein can do no wrong, right? Only 6% of people think of protein as something that can cause weight gain. But I'm here to say that as lovely as protein is, and of course we need protein, it is not the be all end all. It is nothing magic. We need enough of it, but too much of it, just like any nutrient that has calories, will cause weight gain. And there's some other, negatives about protein, but I'm not here today to bash protein, okay? I'm just pointing out that none of these things on this list are the sole cause of obesity or weight gain or anything else. They are part of the nutrient array that we have to work with, and they all have a place, and it depends on what you're doing as to what place they have in your particular diet. Okay. Now, let's get into this about this whole carbohydrates and weight gain thing, because this is something I'm just so tired of. Carbohydrates have been, I think maybe it's been about 15 years, I'm going to say, that carbs have been kind of on the chopping block, so to speak, for the first thing cut when people need to reduce calories. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. We'll get into that in a minute. But the bottom line is, when we look at nutrition intake over time, and I'm talking a long time. So what I've got here is I'm showing you all the major nutrition and health studies that have been done. I'm talking large population studies, the Nutrition, Health, and Examination Study, the Continuing Survey Food Intake by Individuals, the Women's Harvard Health Study, the Nurses Health Study. These are studies that have gone on for years with thousands and thousands of people, not just 20 subjects who lost weight over 6 weeks or 6 months, thousands of people over time. When we compare their body mass index and the percent of carbohydrates in their diet, there is an absolute correlation. The higher your intake of carbohydrate over time, the lower your body mass intake. End of story. I have nothing more to say on it. Seriously. This is shown again and again. It's just so crazy that we continue to think that carbohydrates are the problem. Okay? So, just here summing it up. All prospective cohort studies show an inverse relationship between carbohydrate intake and body mass index. Body weight differences between high and low carbohydrate intake groups is approximately 5 to 7 pounds. Not a big difference. But when you're talking about blood pressure issues, maybe trying to lower cholesterol, that 5 to 7 pounds can make a difference. Okay? In any case, it's not the carbohydrates. I'll tell you one thing that is damaging to health. It's not so much the carbohydrates. It is weight cycling. It is this forking around that I talked about briefly. when we look at something like what happens to someone who has repeatedly lost and gained and lost and gained over the course of their life, the same 10 pounds, we see all kinds of metabolic damage going on and healthcare and long-term healthcare risks like heart disease and diabetes, believe it or not. Losing and gaining weight is much worse for any body than just maintaining a weight, getting your fitness stuff on track, eating a basically healthy diet. That works. May not be the thinnest person on the planet. Don't have to be, but you will be healthy. All right, so let me talk about this slide for a minute because this is actually data from a study done in 2016 with Biggest Loser competition members. Okay, you're all familiar with that. People who get on that program, they got all the support in the world, they lose 100 pounds or whatever it is over a course of, half a year. And, you think, great, this is it. They're going to go on, their lives are going to be fantastic. Well, this is the study following up with those people. And what we can see if we look at this very carefully, yes, this is where their body weight was. And this is what happens within 6 years. The bottom line is that every single time the weight is regained, every single time. There's not much change in their lean mass, but there is change. Of course, they regain their fat mass. Lots of reasons for this, but bottom line is dieting is tough, all right? It doesn't work very well. In fact, I would venture to say that basically most diets fail for, again, a lot of different reasons, but that is a topic for a different presentation. I will tell you that, again, it's not the carbs, all right? But let's get on these carbs and let's talk about athletes in particular, because the low carb, whatever you want to call it, obsession that we've been having over the past, decade, of course, has spread to athletes. In fact, there was a perceived performance benefit that might have, that was promoted for a while out there. There were people who were trying to do low carb as a way to avoid GI distress. And of course, in the bodybuilding world and, wrestling and a few other sports, weight management has always been an issue with carbohydrates because you can't get around the fact that for every gram of glycogen that we store in our bodies, we store 3 grams of water. So if we stop eating carbohydrates and we use up all of our body's glycogen, like right away, we lose all that water. So of course we lose 5 to 7 pounds in 1 week. Yeah, after that, not so much. All right, so let's talk a little bit about gluten, because this is one of the reasons why people tend to also, as athletes, avoid carbohydrates, okay? We all know that there are athletes out there who have GI distress during endurance events, especially like running, triathlon, and some others. And a lot of people have it. And the longer the event, the more likely they're going to have, GI distress. Okay. But the bottom line is there is a physiological reason for that. I mean, you cannot do some of these extreme events and not have GI distress without going through careful training of the gut, finding out what people are sensitive to, making sure the osmolality of what they are consuming during the event is correct so that there isn't too much of a GI load, too much water going into the digestive tract, making basically, we don't even want to talk about what happens during those events, not pleasant. It's not about the gluten, it's more about the physiology and the osmolality, okay? We've also shown that there are no performance benefits of a gluten-free diet. That's just not a thing, okay? There's no weight loss benefit to a gluten-free diet. There might be weight loss if you've happened to cut out all the foods that you normally eat and you can't find any you like. Yeah, that's going to cause a calorie deficit and that's going to cause weight loss. But that's not because of the gluten. That's because you cut out a whole bunch of calories. In terms of gut sensitivity, though, there are many, many, many people with irritable bowel syndrome and all kinds of sensitivity. And often gluten is blamed, but I need to point out as a dietitian, there are so many things out there that cause gut health issues. Lactose intolerance is one thing. Being sensitive to FODMAPs when you're not used to, say, a high fiber diet and suddenly you eat a whole bunch of pomegranate one day or something like that. There are all kinds of reasons why people have sensitivities, and it's not easy to diagnose. In fact, the best way to diagnose that is with a food journal where you're carefully noting what you're eating and what happened. Even the gastroenterologist, there is no foolproof way to figure out what's going on. You have to keep careful records, figure out what the sensitivities are, work with a dietitian, figure it out. But it's, again, this is not necessarily a gluten issue. There are many other issues going on. Now, there is a caveat here. If someone has celiac, okay, genetic disorder, or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, they're going to be sensitive to gluten. Any tiny amount is going to cause damage. Very important. Never, never, never should have gluten. But I would invite anyone to talk to people who suffer from celiac. It's an awful disease, and avoiding gluten is really hard, especially in the US, because our entire diet is, we are very much based on wheat foods, and so because we love them and they taste great, and it's very hard to avoid them. So proper diagnosis, and with celiac that can be done. Very key. I would not advise people to just suddenly just let me just cut out gluten and see what happens. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what happened with this low carb, paleo, everything, keto, and athletes, because to me this matters, and it's kind of a good case study of how some of this stuff gets started and why it's really important when a trend begins to figure out if this is the truth or not. Okay, so as I said, first of all, one thing to know is that often old information becomes new again. It just gets pulled out of the woodwork and suddenly it's the hottest, greatest thing. It's almost never about health. It's almost always about weight. And that's why I put a cyclist up here, because cyclists are always consumed with, obsessed about their weight. Sorry if for the cyclists out there, I'm not trying to throw you all under a bus, but it's just a cultural thing. All right, and the research, bottom line, research does not support low carbs for athletes. And let's take a little more in-depth look at why. First of all, the origins of the low carb thing. There were a lot of anecdotal testimonials. There was the paleo diet that became huge. Let's all eat like caveman. They didn't have access to this gluten, so that must be the way to eat. There was a little bit of scientific evidence, but not much. A lot of this came from one study, and I want to go over that with you. So back in 1983, the dark ages, before most of you were born, there was a study, published by a guy named Finney about the response of cyclists to chronic ketosis. Okay, they didn't have any calorie restriction, and it was looking at all about their exercise capacity with reduced carbohydrate oxidation. So let's take a look at this. First of all, this was a study of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cyclists, okay, who consumed a ketogenic diet for 4 weeks. All right, and what the conclusion of the study was, and this is what it was highly touted, these results indicate that aerobic endurance exercise by well-trained cyclists was not compromised by 4 weeks of ketosis. Okay, let's take a look at that. Well, here are the 5 cyclists who participated, and here are their results. Okay, the time over here is what the time it took them before the ketogenic diet to do the event, and here's what happened afterwards. Okay, I want to point something out. 2 of these people got slower, 1 about the same, and 2 got faster. 2 out of 5. Okay, 5 people and less than, we don't even have a significant result. Are we kidding? Really? But that's exactly what the study showed. And bottom line is, this got touted all over the place that ketogenic diets are great for athletes. Don't ask me how. And it wasn't until Louise Burke out of the Australian Institute of Sport. And if you're not familiar with Louise Burke, highly recommend you look her up on PubMed. Tons of studies among athletes and nutrition. Fantastic research. She was the one who basically said, you know what, I'm tired of this. We're going to look at elite race walkers. So back in 2017, she did a study with 20 elite race walkers, and she comprehensively trounced the data on ketogenesis and athletes, showing that while fat oxidation did improve, performance declined. They all got slower. It's just silly. And she was questioned by everybody out there about, oh my God, that data, blah, blah, blah. So she repeated the study 3 years later, exact same results. So I highly recommend, if you are highly committed to following a ketogenic diet, you happen to be an endurance athlete, don't believe me, please go look at the research. It is out there. But it is absolutely clear that carbohydrates are essential to performance for most athletes. Okay. All right. We've got some anecdotal evidence going on now. Best in the world triathletes and cyclists are finally getting on board with consuming lots and lots of carbohydrate during their events, up to 90 grams per hour, which is crazy because I'm going to share with you the position paper out there. And the recommendation is, it's been said for a while that we can pretty much only tolerate about 30 to 60 grams per hour. Well, the athletes are proving this incorrect. So the research is continuing, and we got to keep our eyes on this because it turns out we can tolerate what we train in terms of carbohydrates. All right. Anyway, the bottom line on all this is that performance declines every time as glycogen stores deplete. We can never, it's very difficult to completely empty out all your glycogen stores. And when we do that, it's called bonking, by the way, at least in the running world. And when we do that, things happen like you start crawling to the finish line because you can't even control your muscles. But before that happens, your brain, the central governor effect, or whatever you want to call it, is going to basically make sure that doesn't happen because that's what our brain does. Its whole goal is to keep us alive, especially when we're doing something like an endurance event. And it's going to do everything it can to slow us down rather than let us completely deplete all our glycogen. All right, so I mentioned this. I want to make sure I do. For those of you who want absolute solid information about nutrition and athletic performance, this is the position statement of the American College of Sports Medicine, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and Dietitians of Canada. And it's their statement about all the things, at least at that time, 2016, of what we know about nutrition and athletic performance. Bottom line is their conclusion on carbohydrates at that time was in an exercise event lasting 1 to 2.5 hours. And by the way, this would include any exercise event that basically athletes should be supplementing 30 to 60 grams per hour of carbohydrate. For those of you who need a little help with the math, I often do. 120 calories to 240 calories per hour of carbohydrate. Usually drinkable is best. Most people are not going to want to be eating solids during their athletic event. In any case, another point I just wanted to make, back to my point about this whole thing about we get on trends that we think are going to be the be all end all. This was one that I found a little bit interesting. There was a great book put out by Scott Jurek, who is one of the leading endurance ultra runners out there at the time. And he basically spurred a whole lot of people to become vegan. And veganism, I'm sure all of you know what veganism is. It's where you would consume absolutely no animal products. And, it's people think it has a performance benefit. My question always on this is, what does the research say? Is it nutritionally adequate? Is it sustainable for the everyday athlete? All of us out there, most of us have busy lives. Being a vegan is a lot of work. And the bottom line is there are some nutritional inadequacies you have to be careful of when you're on it. And I always question when these diets, when these fads come out, is it really about health? Is it about something else? Okay. So I encourage you to do the same. If you need more information about veganism and athletes, highly recommend this source, Practical Advice for Athletes and Exercisers. This was published, I believe, in 2017. And the bottom line is veganism is just another example of something that can be done, but you got to be really careful. make sure the protein's right, fat's right, the iron's okay, B12, zinc, D3, possibly iodine. I know there are vegans out there listening to me right now going, I hate this woman for saying this, but the bottom line is I'm always thinking about the busy endurance athlete who's also maybe a parent, has a high powered job, and is trying to do what they think is the best diet for performance. And in my mind, being a vegan athlete is very challenging. All right, some other things I think we need to consider when we're talking about nutrition for athletes. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the top things out there, at least at the time I did a little analysis of things, gluten-free diets, keto and low carb, vegan, paleo, and clean eating. And I'm always looking when I talk to people about what's missing. I want to know, does their diet contain everything that an athlete might need to be healthy? So when I look at gluten-free diets, the first thing that I often have to check for is there any iron? Is there any folate? Is there any fiber? Because when you remove gluten, which often means you're going to remove wheat, of course, you're going to remove a few other grains. Wheat flour is fortified with iron. In fact, we get a lot of our iron from wheat-based foods. People don't realize that. So when you just cut out the gluten, all of a sudden you've cut out the iron. You've also cut out the folate, by the way, because that's also in there, and you cut out a lot of fiber. Okay, keto. When you do keto and you've decided to do low carb, often the first thing missing is calcium. Folate, also fiber, again, because when you go low carb, you may also cut out the dairy. Okay, veganism, we're gonna always have to fight with not enough calories, possibly not enough protein, depending on what the supplements used are. B12 is something to look at. And when we're looking at paleo, again, we're always, is there going to be calcium in there? Is there any fiber in there? You'll notice that fiber is across three of these. Fiber is a big deal. That's, again, a presentation for another time on the effects on the microbiome when we cut grains, when we cut carbohydrates, and we affect the microbiome. Okay, we also affect it because if we up the protein dramatically, the microbiome does not like high protein. It likes high carb. In any case, there are also effects on the GI system. You can see with a gluten-free diet, low carb diet, constipation can be an issue. Some of these diets provide too much of stuff in certain cases, like too much protein in terms um, of paleo low carb. And I always look at, are these diets sustainable for longer than a short while? Some are, some aren't. It also always depends on the commitment of the person following. And there can be additional effects. When I'm looking at someone who comes to me and they have a lot of food restriction, or they're following a vegan diet, or they're very, very particular about food, the thing I'm always looking for is something called REDS, relative energy deficiency syndrome. Also, topic for another day, very serious among many athletes, causes a lot of poor performance. Okay, so bottom line, when we're talking about performance and nutrition, this is my hierarchy of needs for doing so. First off, we got to make sure we get enough calories, okay, from all the food groups. Okay, remember all the food groups, the basic, 4 or 5 or whatever they are, all of them. They all contribute different nutrients and different things. We need them all. We need a lot of high quality foods that are nutrient dense. This is going to include grain foods and wheat foods and highly colored fruits and vegetables and high quality proteins and all of the things that we already know to be healthy. Okay. We need a lot of micronutrients and phytonutrients. Okay. That includes iron. Even for boys and guys, we need iron. Okay. Especially as athletes. Calcium, your bones do not grow out of nothing. You must consume calcium. It doesn't have to be a milk source, does have to be some source. And vitamin D. None of us are out there sunning ourselves, well, a few of us are sunning ourselves for 15 minutes a day, getting the adequate vitamin D that we can make in our skin. But many of us live indoor lives. We've got to take vitamin D as a supplement. All right, another key thing. Most of us need to eat every 2 to 4 hours. We are not snakes. We've got to eat regularly and time our meals and snacks accordingly to boost our workouts and aid recovery. Sports supplements, very important, especially for those longer workouts. But if someone is always relying on shakes and drinks. Again, when I'm reviewing dietary stuff, I always take a look at that. There's nothing wrong with shakes and drinks, but real food, again, our bodies are designed to digest, at least, outside of an endurance event. We are meant to deal with food. We absorb it well. Um, so I always, food first approach is, of course, very highly recommended. And if you do use performance supplements, okay, now, word about that. Performance supplements, I'm talking shakes, powders, pills, anything that you think might help your performance. Choose wisely, stick to the recommended ones, okay? What is recommended? Okay, back to that position paper I mentioned from and ACSM and the Dietitians of Canada. We know these things work. Hydration, we need carbohydrates, we need sodium, caffeine is an ergonomic aid, beta alanine, beetroot juice, bicarbonate, and creatine. Those are the ones that at this moment, there might be something else out there that's beginning to get a lot of buzz. Those are the things we know actually work when it comes to athletic performance. Okay, if you would like to know more, read the statement. All right, supplements. We got to talk about this. No nutrition for athletes presentation would be complete without this, okay? No nutrition supplement out there is regulated by any governing body for the most part, okay? You need to know that. It means that any supplement that is produced, you are dependent on the manufacturer to have good manufacturing processes and principles and not to be putting something in there or not that something got put in there by accident that is not legal under the rules of the USADA or WADA, the anti-doping commissions, okay? The bottom line is I'm a Team USA athlete. I know these rules carefully because if I show up to a competition and I am tested and there is something in my blood, whether I know it or not, that is not legal, I'm out. That's it. There are no do-overs, there's none of that. You're just gone. So if you choose to take a supplement, please choose something that has been third-party tested, choose a well-known manufacturer. These symbols I've got over here, the informed, we test, you trust choice, and the NSF symbol, these are third-party organizations that have, you can submit your product to them and they will test them to make sure that what you say is there and it's free of all additives or anything dangerous for athletes that are using them. So highly recommend that you, if you have any athletes that are competing at a high level, know what the rules are, go to USADA. If you're going to recommend supplements, you use the ones that are well known and have these certifications. Okay, we also need to talk a little bit about the reliable sources out there for nutrition information for athletes and for people who work with athletes. Okay, these are my top 5. There are many others. Okay, but the United States Olympic Committee is a good one. The Australian Institute of Sport is excellent. American College of Sports Medicine, the National Academy of Sports Medicine, the U.S. Anti-Doping Association also has excellent information. If you need something that's a little more consumer-oriented, highly recommend Nancy Clark's Sports Nutrition Guidebook. She's up to, I believe, her 6th edition of this book. This, as far as I'm concerned, this is the Bible that all athletes should read. It explains a lot of what I have glossed over today. All right. Bottom line is, I'm wrapping up my talking time here. When it comes to nutrition and athletes, and especially, when we're talking about carbohydrates, believe me, there is no magic diet. If there was a magic diet, we would know about it already. Every Olympian on the planet would be following. There is no magic diet. There are diets that we know over time work. They are high in carbohydrate, okay? They are loaded, they've got plant foods, they've got lean proteins, and there are nuances. People find what works for them because it really is about what people can consistently do time and time again, just like training. All right? So, diets that work for people are the ones that are sustainable. Okay? It's longer than a week or two. You need to be able to do it forever. Because the one thing I do know is the nutrition, when we do it right, it aids performance and recovery. Okay. But nutrition done wrong, lifelong consequences. I've seen them. All right. So, um, I just want to say, seriously, I hope you have questions. I would love to answer questions. I'm also going to tell you how to get in touch with me. This is how you can do it. You can send me an email. You could try to get in touch with me on Instagram or X. Sorry. I try, but I don't follow those as well. I do have profiles. I will look, but if you want to get to me, send me an email. That works, and I will do my best to answer any questions that way. Okay. Now, speaking of questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to see what questions came up, and here we go. So, Aaron, I'm not sure if you're going to ask me questions or not.
Here I am.
All right, great. What do we got? Anything?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of great information. We had one comment come in. It's kind of interesting if you could maybe state your thoughts on this.
Okay.
Food is part of a cultural practice and has ethical implications like religion, veganism, celebrations, etc. These things are important to elite athletes as well. Ignoring the aspects of food beyond nutrition will limit how we perform as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. That comes first. Always comes first.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just ignore what you've been raised to eat or believe is the right thing to eat. Um, and even if it's perhaps in conflict with what performance says to do, well, you have to follow your beliefs first. And that is, if you're working with a dietitian or a coach, then they have to respect that. Obviously, there's always going to be what the science says, and then there's going to be what is natural for that person or what they strongly believe is very important to do. And I agree with that entirely. Um, what I get, what I get a little concerned about is that I think sometimes we adopt diets not of our, origin or whatever, but that come to us because of, I don't know what, diet culture, a lot of other things. Um, and I do believe that sometimes we get caught in thinking that we have to eat perfectly
Mhm.
and that there is only one right way to eat. And I do not believe that at all. I think there are a lot of right ways to eat, but I think there are some commonalities to those right ways to eat that not only help us live a long, healthy life, but also help us perform as athletes.
Right, right. Another one that came in wanted to know what are your thoughts on protein bars?
So everything's about context, isn't it? Because if you're telling me, if someone comes to me and they're like, I am so busy, I cannot find time to eat, and all I can do is have this shake and this protein bar, I'm kind of like, okay, well, let's see what we can do about that. Um, Personally, I have usually found that most people who are consuming protein bars already are eating way enough protein. Now, if they are an elite bodybuilder and they're trying to build oodles of mass, that is a different story. That's not true of most of us. And would I rather somebody is eating a protein bar than nothing at all for hours on end? Yes. But when I'm talking about bars, personally, I am usually trying to steer them towards something that is got more carbohydrate, more fiber, and a little more whole food-ish-ness. That said, the bar has to be palatable. And as we all know, those of us who eat bars, including me, uh, that can be a challenge. So the first thing I often do is, okay, for example, you know, if you take a bar, a normal, I'm going to call it a granola bar because, whatever, I don't know what to call it if it's not a protein bar. Um, it's going to have not much protein. I don't know what, 4, 6 grams, not a ton. But we consume it with something else. Say, I don't know, drinkable yogurt, maybe a yogurt. And then maybe we have, a handful of nuts with it as well. Well, all of a sudden now we've got three food groups going on. We got lots of protein, and it's not quite as convenient as ripping open a package and just downing 20 grams of protein in a bar, but it's pretty good, and it's kind of a little mini mealish thing. So, all right, back to this protein bar. So the first thing I often do, I often meet clients in grocery stores, by the way, because I think it's important to say, look, here are some things that I think are good, but you have to be the one to taste these, because we all know if it doesn't taste good, you're not eating it. And we go to the section of the grocery store that has all the bars, and I basically tell them, buy, one of each, try them all, and find what works for you, because it is a blend. So that's how I feel about protein bars. They fit, so do other kinds of bars, and they have a place.
Great answer. Let's see what we have here. Should someone who is doing weightlifting several times a week take creatine? Should someone just doing cardio through the week take creatine?
So that is an interesting question. And I think the bottom line definitely supports that some people are great reactors to creatine, and taking it on a regular basis does help them, build lean mass just a bit, and get just be better um, at least short-term bouts of exercise, okay? But there's also a little research that seems to say, like for older athletes, I put myself in this category, that it helps us retain lean tissue. So the bottom line is, I would say it depends. How do you feel about taking supplements? Do you think it works? Because here's what I do know. If you take creatine and it's working, you're going to gain weight. Now, for some people, that's like, oh my God, I gained weight. And for other people, that's like, oh my God, that's great. So it depends on how you feel about that. And also whether you think, in your personal experience, does it work? And that's an example of, I think it needs to be tried. I think you need to trust the source of it. There are definitely NSF sources of creatine, and you'll know. And is it sustainable? Because creatine is not a once, just before my workout every once in a while sort of thing. You got to take it every day for it to work. Okay.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
All athletes mentioned were cardio performing athletes. How about bodybuilders? Does research show that decreased carbohydrate intake for them also result in reduced performance?
So let's talk about that. You're talking about an explosive effort, okay? Um, that is not going to be glycogen dependent, right? That's just not the system being used. It's a matter of seconds. It's not there. So I would say for bodybuilders, that's a different story when they're in competition, because again, things are lasting a matter of seconds. But if they're doing workouts that are in the gym and lasting a while, then I think it can make a difference. And of course, there are other things with bodybuilders. They are trying to achieve, definition and cutting and all the rest of it. And losing that water weight maybe is probably, something that's just part of their sport. So I think in that case, it depends. But to completely remove carbohydrate, okay, so let's also look at periodization a little bit, because when you're talking about building up to a competition, maybe the last, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks, that's one thing. You're talking about the entire year of no carbohydrates, very low fiber, all the effects on the microbiome. I don't know. From a health standpoint, I don't, I think not. Yeah.
So next we have, what are your thoughts on highly concentrated gels, and how much water do you suggest your athletes consume with a gel packet?
Oh boy. Well, enough. That does not answer it. Um, so definitely you've got to chase a gel with water. How much? Hmm, that's a great question. I'd have to do a little research on that. I would say at least 8 ounces if you can. And that is partly why, when you're talking about um, an endurance event, some people choose to concentrate the calories in one bottle and they're going to have water in the other, just because the concentrated can be really hard to kind of take after a long time. And with the gel, it's sort of the same thing. Um, I think you need to down as many mouthfuls as you can get down. I mean, you're gonna need it, and that's gonna be an experimentation thing too, because not everyone can tolerate gels right off the bat. It does take a little bit of practice there. I mean, it's a great way to go. One other thing, just to note, those of you who are using gels, be aware that I'm not aware of gels that include any sodium at all. So that has to be taken care of separately.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say those are the two big ones. You're going to need, you're going to need a source of hydration. You need your sodium. You need your carbohydrate. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, excellent point. What is your thought of tribulus for retaining muscle in older athletes, specifically women?
Tribulose.
It's tribulus, Tribulis. Am I pronouncing that wrong?
Okay, so
You got a new one?
sure, you got me.
Yeah.
I'm writing this down. I'm gonna look it up and we're gonna find out what it is because I have no idea. Tribulose sounds like it's this form of carbohydrate. I'm just guessing by the name. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's an actual product. So can
Hmm.
the questioner tell me a little bit more about it? Maybe I could give it more.
Yes, I can make a note of that offline and we can get them an answer to that question for sure. Um, looks like our last question. Are certain carbohydrates better than others?
In what way? Context is everything, right?
Mhm.
So I'm going to answer that this way. If you're talking about carbohydrates like, are grains better than fruits and vegetables, or better than dairy, or better than sugar? Okay, that's where we get into trouble because each of those things fulfills a need at different times. Okay, you're not going to get fiber with sources of dairy carbohydrate. Okay, you are going to get fiber with grains and wheat and also with beans and legumes and, fruits and vegetables. And the fiber matters. But should we always have fiber? Well, we need a good amount of fiber. Do we need it every single time we eat a carbohydrate? No, we need enough fiber. And most people, I mean, the recommendations, especially from the dietary guidelines for Americans, are we need half of our sources of fiber to be whole grain. Half of them don't have to be whole grain, they can be enriched grain. So here's the deal. And if you happen to be an endurance athlete, do not recommend a high fiber diet 24 to 48 hours before your major competition because you will be in the bathroom a lot.
Mhm.
So, again, are things better? In what way? If I need antioxidants and phytonutrients, okay, this is an interesting point. Everybody immediately thinks, oh, fruits and vegetables, it's fruits and vegetables, all those colors. And that is true. Colors are amazing, and those are great sources of, phytonutrients and carbohydrates. But the phytonutrients in the surrounding of grains is also one of the most powerful cardiovascular disease preventers there is. Okay, the lining of nuts, same thing. So that's brown. Anyway, here's the deal. So again, I'm not trying to hedge the thing. I truly believe, and I operate from the standpoint that you can vilify whatever food you want, but there is a role for absolutely everything out there. Now, if you are subsisting on a pure diet of, whatever, that's probably not going to be good for you, no matter what it is. Most of the healthiest diets on the planet have a lot of variety. They include almost everything. Um, Again, if you haven't studied the blue zones, I really encourage you to do so. That's another really cool source. Anyway, okay,
Yeah.
enough.
Let's see. Well, we did have one more come in actually. Why do you think mindful eating is a diet?
I don't. It was put in there. I do think that people have to be careful with that. I don't really know what the heck is meant by mindful eating. If you're talking about I'm taking a mouthful of food, I'm going to chew it 5,000 times, I'm going to swallow it and feel it. Okay, that's fine. Um, I mean, that's not necessarily a diet, that's just being very aware of what you're eating. But I do think we have to be careful because, you know, why do we have to give it a name? Shouldn't we all be mindful of what we're eating? I mean,
Mhm.
isn't that something all of us should be doing? I
Right.
mean, eating mindlessly in the car is probably not the healthiest way to eat things. However, there are times when we do need to eat in the car. So,
Right. Right.
what am I going to say? Yeah.
Well, this has been a great, great discussion. It looks like that is all the questions we have for today. So thank you, Michelle, for a very informative presentation, which was made possible by our partner, Wheat Foods Council. And thank you to everyone else for joining today and for all of your questions. And just a reminder, the webinar was recorded, so you can view it again at any time using this same link. We'll also be sending out an email tomorrow morning that includes the replay link. So, with that, thanks again, everyone. And Michelle, thank you very much for everything. And have a wonderful, wonderful day, everybody.
All right. Take care for now.
Bye bye.